Welcome to the Deep Dive,
Emerald City Hockey's Seattle Kraken podcast.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Deep Dive, Emerald City Hockey's Seattle Kraken podcast. RJ, we've got a good one this week. We're going to be talking about kind of like the state of the Kraken roster in light of the Willie Nylander extension in Toronto, because, you know, he was kind of one of the names we had circled for the Kraken this upcoming offseason. We've got to talk about the goalie controversy brewing in Seattle, RJ, as Joey Daccord just continues to, you know, not allow goals, which is apparently a pretty good thing to do if you're a goaltender. We've got all of the news and notes from this past week, including a couple roster things going on, so maybe some tweaks to the lineup, and of course, Oliver Bjorkstrand being an all-star. And then our Patreon announcement for this upcoming month as well. But of course, RJ, we've got to start off the podcast thanking Queen Anne Beer Hall for being the lovely sponsor. I know last week we talked about the fact that that's where all the Kraken players went to celebrate the Winter Classic, watch the UW game. I mean, that's still like the best way we could ever promote this place, right? It's where the players drink. Like, I don't know how you go up from there, RJ.
You really can't. And you know it's going to be awesome today, of course, with UW playing in the College Football National Championship. I mean, Congrats to them, right? I mean, getting into that game, and you never know who you're going to see watching a big game there at Queen Anne Beer Hall. That's all I'm going to say.
Definitely. And try the pretzel, of course. I can't wait for the Detroit-style pizzas, RJ. Win!
I know. They're working on it. I've seen the pizza oven still, and I know they're there.
I'm not scheduling another trip up to Seattle until they're on the menu and available.
I'll let them know.
Throwing down that gauntlet now. Real quick, just for everybody, our Patreon schedule this month, we have it set. We're going to be posting it around social media in just a little bit. On the January 18th against the Edmonton Oilers, that is going to be our live game commentary this month. It's a 6 o'clock start Pacific. On the 23rd, at 7, because all these otherwise start at 7. On the 23rd, RJ will be hosting his Armchair GM stream, where you can kind of talk about some stuff. I know we're going to get into the state of the roster a little bit later on in this podcast, but certainly when it comes to, you know, now with Nylander off the block, RJ, who are going to be some of the top free agent targets for the Kraken this upcoming offseason. Find out on the 23rd, joining RJ on his Armchair GM stream. And then on the 29th, we'll have our prospect live chat, where I'll be going over video and how all the prospects did at the World Juniors, as well as how they've done since they've joined their regular teams back, whether it's in the Canadian Hockey League or around the world. So that's our awesome Patreon schedule. Appreciate everybody who's Patreon. And then, of course, usually Friday, but once a week for sure, we have the Red Glare podcast as normal. So everybody can go check that out. If you're watching on YouTube, you can check out the link in the description below. As for news and notes, RJ, number one big news, we beat the deep dive curse because we stalled just talking long enough, you and I, before we started recording. Ryker Evans is back.
Yes, he is. The Kraken called up Ryker Evans this morning, according to the NHL media site. And this is something we kind of predicted a little bit. Like, look, after Jacob Megna was waived and claimed by the Chicago Blackhawks, the Kraken were down to 6 defensemen on the roster. And that's enough for games, but of course you kind of want to spare as you head out for a long road trip. And so I was curious who the call-up might be, because Ryker Evans, if you call him up, you kind of want to play him, right? Mm-hmm. And that's my big question with this call-up, is just how much he's going to rotate into the lineup, because I feel like it would be a waste to just call him up as purely an extra and not have him get into the lineup over this road trip. So that's the big question, I think, is what does this look like? Is it kind of rotating through for maybe a Justin Schwartz like we saw in the past? Is he just going to be there as an extra? I think that's probably the least likely scenario. What do you think about the timing of this call-up and what we're going to see from Evans while he's up here?
Yeah, so I'm with you, right? You're embarking on your longest road trip of the season. You want to have somebody available to you, right? Because it's not going to be as easy as just calling somebody up on a, 2.5 hour plane ride from Coachella Valley. You want to be able to have them available should you need them at a moment's notice. So you got to have somebody. You look at who they have in Coachella Valley that has NHL experience, which is something you'd want as you're continuing to, find yourself in this really tough battle for a wild card spot. Ryker Evans has NHL experience. He's also waivers exempt, so you don't have to worry about sending him back down post road trip if you wanted to. He makes the most sense. I'm with you. It doesn't make a ton of sense to call him up and just sit him. However, I think they're going to continue rolling with the lineup that they've had now since that Flyers game. And it's going to be basically whenever somebody has a bad game, they'll be sat for Riker Evans. I don't think Riker Evans gets in there right away. I think it's going to be one of those, like, you know, once we see like a rough performance from whether it's Dumoulin, Schwartz, somebody else, that's, I think, when Riker Evans comes in, and then it's just until Riker Evans has a bad game, right? I think they're just going to keep doing that kind of back and forth, RJ, because generally speaking, Dave Haxtell, once he's shown us something, that's it, right? He's shown us what he's going to do, and that's what he did the last time Riker Evans was up.
Right. I mean, do you think this is good for a blue line, or I guess like for a forward group last year, right? Where you have somebody looking over your shoulder, I guess, that if you have a bad game, you might be sitting for a bit. It seemed to work in the past.
I think it does, right? I mean, it puts that pressure on you to perform each and every night. You can't coast, right? And if you're the Kraken right now, you dug yourself a pretty big hole at the beginning of the year. You can't afford to coast through games. You can't afford to have somebody, you know, play bad and have that potentially spiral into a slump. So if they need that motivation, or you need to kind of get them out of the lineup if you start feeling like things are going a bad way for them, I think this is the way to do it. I mean, look, they're professional athletes. That's the reality of the job. I mean, we talk about this with goaltenders all the time. This was the situation with the goaltenders in training camp, right? There was going to be one backup spot behind Philip Grubauer, down to Drieger and Joey to battle out for it. Joey won that battle. I think based on how he's played for the Kraken this year, you'd say that worked out pretty well for them. So I'm kind of on board when you have competition amongst teammates on rosters.
Yeah, I do think I agree. I think it brings out the best in the players. And I think the Kraken have done a really good job of making sure there is that competition at just about every position group. And I mean, like, most teams can't always do that. And the Kraken have found a way to do that. And now, even with the forwards, for a while with all the injuries, it was okay, if you're healthy and, you know, can come up, you're in. But it seems like that's no longer the case, because another bit of news here, we've got Jaden Schwartz really ramping up for a return. And last practice, so a couple days ago, was kind of the big milestone there. He took another progression, and that was that he was actually taking line rushes with the team. And so that's kind of the last step usually before players ready to return to game action. And personally, I would not be surprised at all to see him play against Buffalo tomorrow. I think that's probably the game that was being targeted after a lot of time off. Of course, Haxtell won't tip his hand. We don't have any kind of official knowledge, but you look at the line rushes, and it begs the question of, okay, what happens to the lineup when Jaden Schwartz returns to the lineup? And so looking at it here, Haxtell, at least for practice line rushes, kept the first line, the Beniers line, intact, Tatar, Beniers, Everly. And he's got Jaden Schwartz playing on that, you know, second line with Alex Wenberg and Brandon Tanev. And so Tolvanen and Gord Bjorkstrand, of course, that stays together. It has to. You can't mess with that line. But then you have a very interesting looking fourth line, if you want to call it that. Andre Burakovsky, Ty Kartye, and Jared McCann. I don't think we can fairly call that a fourth line. No. I mean, it certainly doesn't look like one. Dylan, is this the closest the Kraken have come to just having 4 second lines?
Yes. I mean, that's it. If there ever was a time to say that they've reached that level, this is the time to say that, right? I mean, this is what everybody's going to get 15 minutes, right? Like, just across the board. Like, I don't know how else you're supposed to do it, right?
Yeah, maybe 17 for the Gord line. I think that's the one that would stick above the rest. I mean, if you're going to have a line that plays like a fourth line minutes-wise, I guess you'd go the Wenberg line, right?
Yeah.
With Schwartz coming back from injury. Tanev, I think, you know, more properly a fourth liner, even though he's played better than that this season. I don't know what it looks like, but it'll be interesting to see, too, is this the next step up for Andre Burakovsky, because he hasn't played more than 11 minutes in a game since returning from injury. And I know you want to be careful easing him back, but, like, I don't know how you keep that line under 11 minutes as a fourth line and do that to Burakovsky and McCann.
Yeah, I mean, they're going to get special teams time, right? Like, they're going to be featured on the power play, both of those two guys. So that's going to get them minutes there. I'm with you. I think it's one of those, you ease them back in. I also think it's probably because they're going to have to try to figure out over a game or two who's really going to be the center for that line. Is it going to be Jared McCann? Is it going to be Ty Kartye? Right? Like, that's an aspect that I could see also kind of causing that line to maybe have a couple minutes less, is just because if they want to stick Ty Kartye down the middle, you might need to give him a game or two to really adjust to doing that at the NHL level. And I could see that maybe, you know, limiting that line in certain situations. But otherwise, yes, I think you would deploy the Wenberg line more defensively. You'd deploy that line more offensively. And then you just kind of let the games dictate how often you're in those two situations, and you go from there, maybe?
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, Karche, because he's had the last few games as a center, and I think he's adapted pretty well to that. But McCann can certainly play center too, so it'll be interesting
Right.
to see what they do with that. But also, one thing I love about this is you want a deep lineup, I think, like this. You want it to be deployed this way when you're on the road,
Mm-hmm.
because the deeper you can be, the more matchup proof you can be.
Yes.
Because other teams have the last change, and you can't, kind of get on top of them with a stacked line. I mean, if you are an opposing team and you're trying to take your top line and catch the Kraken out there with a weak forward line, who do you go with? Who do you target? You really can't. There's nobody you can target as kind of a weak line. I think that works especially well on the road. So I like seeing this right before a road trip.
Right. I mean, again, the line you would circle as maybe being the weakest would be the Wenberg line, but really it's also arguably the most solid defensively. Right.
Right.
Like,
that's the thing. They're going to shut you down.
Yeah. You're thinking weakest in terms of like what they could do to you, but really they're not going to allow your star players to get going either. So it's one of those things where, yeah, it's a matchup nightmare. It should help the guys too, as you are on a long road trip. Those things can be a grind. It can be tough on the body, all that kind of stuff. You don't get a ton of time. Got some back-to-backs in there to heal up. So I think this will also help out with that aspect of it all too. Certainly going to be interesting. I mean, the Kraken have kind of been getting by on the depth. Well, this is a lineup that certainly, hopes that continues.
Yeah, and then of course there's Kyler Yamamoto coming out of the lineup if this is what they choose to go with. He's playing great. He's like top 6 of the team in goals. There's nothing he's doing wrong. This feels kind of like we're starting to get back to last season, right? Where there's going to be a depth forward who's playing well enough to stay in most lineups, but because of all the talent there, you can't have him in. I mean, Dylan, does this come down to just that he can't play center?
It does feel that way, which is then also why it's a little weird that they're not going with McCann down the middle for that line and kind of benching Ty Cartier, because when this first seemed like an option, and especially after last game where it looked like Yamamoto and Burakovsky were developing some chemistry, in the post-game chat, I had said Cartier, I think for me, would be the person that I would sit first, and a lot of chat also kind of agreed with that. And then the option was, well, who do you have center that line? Well, McCann can center that line. And so I do think it's a little odd that they really don't seem to want to do that.
Yeah, I mean, I understand not wanting to do that. Personally, I would go with the way that they're doing it, because I don't want McCann to have to make that adjustment again to playing center when I just don't see him there long term. I mean, this is one of your best goal scorer. I just want to stick with him at the wing because that's where I see him long term, and I don't think the upgrade from Karche to Yamamoto is necessarily worth it.
Right, but do you see? Right, but okay, I get what you're saying, right? Like, and I totally understand that, but here's the problem. What is then the long-term lineup look like? Because this is everybody healthy. You don't have enough spots for everybody. Jared McCann is on your 4th line right now. Like, what's his long-term?
I think, ultimately long-term, I think we're looking at maybe Tanev going down toward more of a 4th line role, and that kind of frees up a spot for McCann. And we'll see how they distribute the minutes. But like looking at this, I see it almost as like Burakovsky, Karche, McCann. I look at that as like the 3rd line. In reality, look, it's like Gord. It's the Gord line, then the Beniers line, and then this Burakovsky, Karche, McCann line, and then the Wenberg line, almost as like the 4th. I think you can still give McCann, and also McCann never gets super huge minutes. No, like even back to last season and this year, he doesn't. So I don't think that's going to be a huge issue.
Yeah, it's just it's one of those McCann is one of the kind of the lost boys on this lineup, right? Because his spot does, it always seemed like he would be on that Beniers line, but you can't break up that Beniers line right now. And I don't see that really changing anytime soon, just given how well Tatar is playing with Eberle and Beniers, kind of getting both of those guys to kind of finally wake up. We know what McCann looks like on Wenberg's wing, and it's okay, right? Like but it's more so just because McCann does his thing wherever he is. I'm just starting to think long term. Maybe this is better for the state of the roster stuff later, but what is the long term place for Jared McCann? Because I don't know where he's supposed to be if he's going to stay on the wing.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, next season things are going to look very different, and we'll of
Yes.
course talk about that. But for this season, I think like you basically kind of throw them wherever you need help, and maybe you can always assume kind of one forward injury just because they're not going to stay fully healthy forever. We've certainly learned that throughout this season, and he can kind of go up. But I mean, long term, I wonder if, as McCann, Wenberg, and Schwartz been a thing.
Well, it was
Tanev
like,
would be the guy to send down.
yes,
Like that's the guy.
Yeah, it was very briefly earlier, right? Like when they did the first shakeup of McCann off the first line, right?
Yeah, I'm trying to look at this here to see how many minutes if they've gotten.
Yeah.
So
it wouldn't be
McCann,
a lot of minutes,
Wenberg,
though.
and Schwartz. Yeah, it's not a lot of minutes.
Yeah.
So they hasn't really played together much. Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm just saying, you also got Jared McCann on a 7-game goalless streak too, which is his longest of the season as well. And so I don't know. I'm just trying to figure things out there. And like I said, Ty Cartier becomes your weakest center option down the middle, right? Like that's
true. Yeah, that's true. I mean, heck, if you're looking toward the end of the season, if you're gearing up for a playoff run or whatever, you could throw Shea right in that spot also, and just think about that line.
Oh, I want that now. Jeez, come on, just do it. Yeah. So it's gonna be interesting to see kind of how things go, and I'm sure, again, just like what we were talking about with Riker Evans joining the D, it's going to be based on how they play, right? Ty Cartier has a bad game or two in a row. I got to imagine things will get shaken up, right? Like that's just the way the roster is right now. So we'll see, but it's going to definitely be interesting to see when Jaden Schwartz does come back. The other big news from this week, RJ, was Oliver Bjorkstrand becoming an All-Star, right? The NHL announced all 32 All-Star players from each team. Oliver Bjorkstrand is the Kraken All-Star. There's the chance to vote more in. Everybody, you can go and make sure you vote for guys like Vince Dunn, Joey Daccord, all them to get into the All-Star game. But Oliver Bjorkstrand is the one that we know is going, and we know he's going, RJ, because he canceled his Airbnb in San Diego. Good for him.
Yep. That's confirmed. I mean, I love the story around like the announcement and everything. So for those of you who haven't seen it already, which I'm sure is probably very few of you if you're listening to this podcast. So when Oliver Bjorkstrand was named the Kraken's All-Star, the Kraken posted a video of him talking with Dave Haxtell, and Haxtell informing him that he would have to cancel his vacation plans over the All-Star break. He was supposed to go to San Diego originally, get some sun. Mm-hmm. Haxtell's like, well, can you cancel those plans? And Bjorkstrand's like, yeah, I guess. He's like, because, well, you're going to have to take a trip to Toronto. And the way Haxtell said it, too, made it sounded like he was getting traded to the Leafs.
Absolutely.
I mean, that's kind of what it sounded like.
And you can tell that that's how Bjorkstrand took it, too.
Right, looking at his reaction, and even when he was told that he was going as an All-Star, he didn't seem the most thrilled about it. I think he was still kind of processing everything, but it made for a pretty funny video. And of course, Bjorkstrand, was made aware of that. He heard everybody, and then he had a fantastic Instagram post the next day with the caption, "Attention everyone, I got a very important news announcement. I don't always have the best reactions. Ask my wife, but I couldn't be more honored to be selected." I don't know about you, I certainly felt that. I don't always have the best reactions to things. My girlfriend would know very well. Yes. So that was great. And it was a picture of him reacting, but he has like photoshopped a smiling face over his face in the video, and then post the screenshot of his Airbnb being canceled. So congrats to Oliver Bjorkstrand. That's all to say. Congrats to Bjorkstrand. Such the perfect reaction. That's so him. Like if you talk to him in the room, I know you were chatting with him after the Winter Classic. Like that is just so him.
Oh, definitely. Because even like with the Winter Classic stuff, it was a little subdued, right? Of all the guys that we talked to, he was the most just like, yeah, it's cool. Like, whoa, it's my first time. Yeah, nice. It's cool. Yeah, I'm excited. And it's just like, okay, yeah, okay. As other guys are like gushing, they like telling you everything about it, and he's just like, yeah, it's exciting. So I definitely understand that from him. And yeah, look, he totally deserves to be there, right? He's second on the team in points, second on the team in goals. He's been playing fantastic. He was a big part of them being able to win the games that they were able to win earlier this season, RJ, because he out through a lot of that early portion of the season, that first month and a half, he was really the only forward capable of doing much, right? Like he was the only guy kind of consistently scoring, and they were moving him up and down the lineup. He was on 3 different lines in the first month and a half of the season, just because they were trying to spread that wealth that he was bringing. He was the only player with any consistency. And so for him to be rewarded for having that with this All-Star bid, I'm very, very excited for him. I think it is very, very well deserved. I know a lot of people are like, why wasn't it Vince Dunn? You know, we talked about this on the Red Glare podcast, RJ, from a league-wide perspective. Very much looks like they weren't taking defensemen. One defenseman per conference. That was all that was taken so far. So I think that had something to do with it. But I think Bjorkstrand absolutely deserved to have this honor as well.
Yeah, I agree with that. And yeah, the Vince Dunn snub talk, I get it. But yeah, for whatever reason, they're not picking defensemen. You couldn't figure out why. But yeah, if you're going to have one defenseman per conference, no, I don't think Vince Dunn is the best defenseman in the Western Conference. So I guess by that lofty standard, you know, I guess he doesn't quite, you know, reach that level. But, you know, Bjorkstrand absolutely deserved. Like, he was the line fixer for, you know, as you mentioned, this like early part of the season, he fixed all the lines, and still leading point scorer. I mean, just you look at the counting stats, top point scorer among the forwards, you know, just only trailing Vince Dunn. So can't argue with that. Happy for him too, because it's his first All-Star game. And I think, you know, the first All-Star game kind of means more to players than if you know, have 4 or 5 or so. It's kind of the same song and dance, right? And if you haven't experienced it before, it can be really cool. I think it can get repetitive probably for players, but you know, it feel good for Bjorkstrand that he gets his first.
Yeah, definitely. And I can't wait to watch him. And again, we can help Vince Dunn or Joey Daccord or some other members of the Kraken get to the All-Star game. You could go to the NHL's website and they have stuff there that can kind of take you to the fan vote to help shape the rest of the All-Star game squads. I know Joey Daccord is part of that short list for goaltenders that can join the Western Conference team. So you can all go and look. I wish I could help you and tell you that it was an easy process to vote, but it's not. This website is a mess. The voting website is a mess, as we discovered also live during the Red Glare last time. It's a struggle to vote, but once you kind of figure it out, just know that there's like a search bar on the kind of the right side. You can search for the players by name or sort by team there. Then you can kind of make things happen. So there is that wonderful news for the Kraken and Oliver Bjorkstrand. All right, now RJ, speaking of Joey Daccord, potential All-Star on the short list of goaltenders for the Western Conference All-Stars. RJ, is there a goalie controversy in Seattle? Because boy, it sounds like everybody sure thinks there is. I know we talked about this a little bit last week. We've talked about it on all the subsequent post games as well. What do you think the current state of the goaltending situation, tandem pairing is for the Kraken, given how well Joey Daccord has been playing?
I think right now they're a goalie tandem without a second goalie. They're waiting for the second goalie to return, and they're very lucky scheduling wise that they've been able to make it so they only really need one goalie. I mean, Joey Daccord started 11 out of the last 12. He's played out of his mind, and thankfully, the way the schedule shakes out, you only needed Chris Drieger once, and Drieger stepped up. I mean, he was fantastic, but I think ultimately, look, I think it comes down to how NHL goalie tandems work, and I think that takes away a lot of goalie controversies that would ordinarily exist around the league. I think in the modern NHL, with what we know about players' bodies, and that goalie can't be playing 77, 78 games like you used to see some goalies do, you're gonna need 2 goalies who can play a lot of games for you. And I think that's what the Kraken have when Philip Grubauer is healthy. I think it ultimately will go back to that, but Joey Daccord, he's the starter. He's gonna get most games as long as he's playing like this. Dave Haxtell, I mean, we've mentioned this on past podcasts, we've mentioned it on the deep dive, but Haxtell is going to play the goalie who's playing better. And right now, that's certainly Joey Daccord. And so I don't think that's even really controversial at this point. I mean, he is just clearly playing some of the best goaltending that the Kraken have ever had. And they're going to continue to ride him as long as that's the case. But when Grubauer does come back, you're still going to need him to play a fair amount of games, because that's just how it works. Players' bodies can't hold up to playing every single game. We'll talk about it a little bit later as far as the schedule and how long they can afford to have Joey just starting all these games, which I think is actually a surprisingly long time given their schedule luck. But ultimately, you're going to need Grubauer to come back and play some games and be a factor for you in the way that if Grubauer was doing this, you'd need Daccord to be a factor for you down the stretch. I mean, what do you think, Dylan? I haven't left a whole lot for you, but are you in agreement with that? I mean,
Yeah. Look, at the end of the day, sports, as I've always said, is a results-driven business, right? Like we just talked about this. We think competition between teammates is a good thing. It brings out the best, right? You're going to end up with the best performance from somebody if you do that. Right now, Joey Daccord is turning in the best performance that really any Kraken goaltender has ever had, like just to be real, but it's also because Philip Grubauer's not there, right? We don't know what Grubauer would be doing right now, and it's just one of those things of, I get it, it's nice to be able to say this guy is the starter and just have that be the thing, but especially when it comes to goaltenders, it's never that easy, right? All goaltenders over the course of a season go through hot stretches, they go through cold stretches. That's just the way it is, and you want to be in a place where when your goaltender's going through a cold stretch, you can hand the reins over to the other goaltender and it doesn't become a controversy, right? Because it isn't one, right? Internally within the team, it's not a controversy. Everybody understands that that's the way it goes, right? That's the way it goes with all players. Like we just talked about, right? Justin Schultz has a bad game. Riker Evans came in, seized that opportunity until he had a bad game. Then Justin Schultz came back and started playing well. Like that's just the way sports goes. They understand that it's, it's a competition for limited spots. And that's just what it is. And so I think it's one of those, Joey's going to be the guy until he isn't. And then it'll be Grubauer or Drieger until they aren't. And then it's just going to move on to the next guy. And that's just the way the situation is going to go. I know it's just like with the captain thing, right? We can make a lot of it like, oh, this guy's the starting goaltender, right? Like it has cachet, that saying. But I think as the NHL more so moves towards these tandems, you look at like what Boston's doing, RJ, these last couple of years, right? Where it's really just, it's two guys. And maybe you have the 1A, 1B type thing. It's like running backs in the NFL. Any of these positions where it's tough on bodies, guys can get streaky. You're going to start running into this more and more where it's not so much one guy and then his backup. It's just two guys. And I think that's where the Kraken are. But really right now it's three guys.
Yeah, it is. I mean, you need another spare. You have to take into account injuries, right? That can happen, and it's certainly in a position like I love the running back comparison because I think that's kind of what goaltending is turning into, is the running back position for any football fans out there that know you see a lot more running back my committee now, and as a result, you also see the results in the contracts there, and so if you give a big contract out to one guy, it can be difficult, and so that's kind of the thing that's going to be hanging over Grubauer's head, unfortunately, for the remainder of this contract. But I just think you have to adjust to the reality of the way the position is going. And so I don't, it's only a controversy really if the guys, have some animosity toward each other and you don't have that supportive environment. But I mean, gosh, by now we've certainly learned the Kraken have that supportive environment. I mean, you look no further than the way that Drieger and Daccord celebrate after games and how happy they are for each other. And Grubauer is a part of that as well. Yeah. Same thing with Schultz and Evans. Like when Schultz came back in the lineup and everyone was so happy for him. Like it's about maintaining the right kind of environment in the locker room so there can be no controversy because everyone supports each other. And I think that's kind of where we're at. So as far as is Joey the starter? Right now, absolutely, it's his net. But I think the title of starter doesn't mean as much as it used to, and it's not all that important. But Dylan, I wanted to ask you about a title that I think is much more important than starting goalie, one that could maybe be a little more controversial. I think there's a little more competition, actually, for Joey Daccord in this. Is Joey Daccord the most fun goalie in the NHL right now?
Yeah.
Right here, right now.
Yeah. I hate that you're putting me in a spot where I have to say no.
Hey, that's fine. That's fine. There's a lot of competition out there, Dylan. I don't think anyone would fault you. There are a lot of great goalies, a lot of really fun goalies out there. This is a whole league here.
Yeah,
I'm making the bar very high. So go ahead, explain why not.
Just because nobody's going to take that over as long as Marc-Andre Fleury is playing in the NHL, right? So ask me again in a year, maybe, and my answer could be different. But I'm sorry, Marc-Andre Fleury is the most fun goaltender. Now, like I guess I also have to ask, right? Do you mean like off ice, strictly on ice while they're playing the position? Because then Joey is certainly one of the more fun goaltenders, if not the most fun, just given how much he goes out there and he plays the puck, right? The style in which he plays, the fact that, we've talked about this in the past, right? Once he goes down, he's very limited in his movements at that point, but what that's led to has been some really fun and spectacular, big saves when he's kind of on his belly, and that's a lot of fun to watch. That's not something you see too much in today's NHL, but you look at he had one of those in the Winter Classic. He had one of those against Ottawa, those big time glove saves coming across where he's just kind of flopping around, and it looks a lot of fun, RJ. I'm not going to lie. But if you're going to incorporate everything else in, Joey, I've said it before, he's a wonderful human being, fantastic person. He is a fun guy to talk to. But, Marc-Andre Fleury's going out there and playing practices with a cane after they punk him for being too old, right? Like, it's hard to top that.
Yeah, it is. And, I was going to make the argument for Joey, and I was going to really lead with the on-ice stuff, right? With the during a game, because I think he's definitely the most fun goalie to watch during games in the NHL right now, just because there's no goalie that brings the same level of, you have the acrobatic saves, you kind of have the adventures playing the puck, but the puck playing, that's what makes the difference for me, is that no goalie, I think right now, plays the puck as much as Joey Daccord.
Nope. And
that's exciting. It's fun to watch. You never know what exactly you're going to see. The backhand flip, I can't get over that. From when they're killing a penalty there in that Ottawa game, and the puck kind of squirts out to him, and just on his backhand, he gets to clear himself. It's the kind of thing where it's fun, but it's also really effective, because all it takes is a couple times where something like that goes wrong, and that can really put a damper on a goalie and kind of make him try things less. That hasn't really happened for Joey yet. And I love just seeing him kind of play freewheeling like that with the puck. The other thing too, especially as they've been on this run, this winning streak, there is no goalie in the league where the threat of a goal is so great.
Yes.
Because it's about the skill, which he undoubtedly has. And not every goalie has the skill to consistently hit those empty nets. I mean, NHL goalies are really good. They can hit them, fairly often. But more than that, it's the will. It's the will to try and really go for it and be aggressive in those moments. And a lot of goalies, even if they have the will to do it, even if they're kind of looking, even if they want to shoot, they won't be as open about it as Joey is. I think after the Winter Classic, where Joey just kind of even cut off that report, yes, I was thinking about it. I was trying to shoot for the empty net. And letting everyone know that you're in that mindset, just really adds to the fun. I mean, you saw it in the Ottawa game. If you were in the building, that was the talk around everybody in the press box. The crowd could feel it. Everybody knew you're up by 2 goals. The other team pulls the goalie. And there's this whole other super special event that you're watching out for. And that's every single game where you have a lead, a 1 or 2 goal lead coming down the stretch. That provides so much fun that you just don't get from, I think, any other goalie in the league. There is no other goalie in the NHL where their team's up by a couple goals, the other team pulls the goalie, and you can be so sure that that's going through their mind, that they're going to try it. That just adds so much.
Yeah. I think to summarize what you're trying to say, RJ, is there's no other goaltender in the NHL where it feels like a win and not an if on them scoring a goal, right? Because that's what it feels like watching Joey Daccord right now, is that it's just a matter of when. It's not a matter of if he's going to get one, right?
Yeah. You've done what you do so often, I think, is take me rambling for about a minute and summarize it, putting it into one sentence. So thank you, Dylan. Yeah, I mean, really, it feels like it's only a matter of time. Feels like Joey Daccord is going to score a goal this season, just a matter of when. And I almost hate that they're going out on the road for such a long road trip, because I feel like it could happen during this road trip and I wouldn't be in the building to see it. But that's so fun. But also, I think you take that on the ice. I think on the ice for sure during games. And then off the ice, too, it's not like he's really lacking in that category. Yes, he's not Marc-Andre Fleury. I will give you that. Nobody's Marc-Andre Fleury. But he is so media friendly. I mean, we've talked to him after, because he's playing so well. We get him after every single game at this point. And he just likes talking to us, it seems like. A lot of players will tolerate talking to the media. They'll be very good about it. I mean, he'll kind of go out of his way, even after his availability is over, to just chat with us and tell us stories. And it's always really good stuff. He's got a great personality. He's funny, and he's kind of aware of the situation that he's in. So I think really he's got the whole package as far as just being a really fun goalie in the NHL. And yes, I know it's hard to beat Flower, but if you're weighting the on-ice stuff, I think he's got a really good claim to it.
Yeah, no, he certainly does. He certainly does. Like I said, if you're looking strictly on ice, I think you give it to him. I think, off ice, I'm with you. Nobody's more approachable in a locker room than Joey Daccord, right? And that goes back to his time with the Firebirds and everything that went on there. He's a very honest person, which is very much appreciated from a media standpoint, but I think also from a fan standpoint, right? Like, whenever you do have a quote come out from him, like, that is him, right? He's not putting on a face for the media ever. Like, you can tell that he is being sincere with everything he says, all of that stuff. Like I said, he could be the best person that is the NHL goaltender and stuff, but I don't know, maybe it's because I grew up watching him, and so I got to give it to Flower, but I just think Flower overall kind of has to take it, given all the shenanigans this year especially. Right? Like,
yeah, there's been a lot this year. I mean, this is timed kind of poorly too, for my argument anyway, where you have that play where he's diving back to protect the empty net as he was going to get pulled. The Wild go back and score to tie the game. Like, yeah, Fleury has brought a lot of fun this year. So, I mean, I have a hard time arguing against him. So, but I'm curious what everyone else thinks too. Like, let us know in the comments too. Is Dylan just biased from his time as a Penguins fan? Is there something to what I'm saying, or, are there some other goalies that we're ignoring here?
Yes.
Because there's a whole wide league of goalies. I mean, you go the Swayman-Ullmark tandem and how fun they are. There's a lot of goalie fun happening in the NHL, but Joey's certainly a part of it.
Oh, definitely. And he's up there towards the top. Now, one last thing on the goalie stuff, and with Joey in particular before we move on, and that's what you were saying about looking ahead at the schedule and talking about the fact that he might be able to just play every game. And I'm thinking, RJ, that doesn't line up with, everything else we were talking about, how you need tandems and the wear and tear on a body. So what do you mean by that?
Right. So, I mean, it certainly doesn't line up with even my philosophy. I think you have to be very cautious about overplaying a goalie. We saw it with Martin Jones last year. He played a lot of games. I think he started 14 out of 15 games once Grubauer went down, and he played fantastic in that stretch. But you know what? I think we can look back at it with hindsight and say he got burned out.
Definitely.
And, we're seeing what happens in Toronto actually now with him not being burned out. He comes in for a limited stretch, second star of the week. Good for Martin Jones. But you look at the schedule. I think the Kraken have gotten incredible luck with this schedule since Joey has come in. The timing of it, because you don't want a goalie playing every other night and for too long, and that can have a wear on guys. But you have the holiday break from the 23rd to the 27th. So you already got a few days off there. You have Drieger playing on the other side of it. Joey had 6 days off in between games already leading up to the Philly game and the Winter Classic. And you look at it going forward. I mean, as we're talking right now, the Kraken are in the middle of a stretch where they have 4 days off in between games. Mm-hmm. That's basically like letting the backup or another goalie go and take a game or two in the middle of the Ottawa and Buffalo games. It's just nobody's playing. So that works fine. I think he can start against Buffalo, no problem, because it's been 4 days off. Then you have a couple games, Washington, Columbus, and it's every other day. 3 games, I think, is not that much. And then you have the back-to-back against Pittsburgh and New York. This is the one situation, I think, where you need another goalie to come in. Whether Grubauer is okay by then or whether that's Chris Drieger, I think, just pick one of those 2 games. It's a back-to-back. Yeah. But after that, so then, let's assume Daccord's playing on the 15th, 2 days off then, before Edmonton, and that's a big game. I think you want him playing that one. Mm-hmm. But then you don't have the every other day thing. You have the 19th and 20th off, Toronto on the 21st. Okay, that's fine. 22nd and 23rd off, and then you're back here for Chicago on the 24th. Then you're back at home too with days off. Like, I think they could really run this until the end of January, really.
Yeah. I mean, well, just to go back to kind of how we started off this whole conversation, right? It'll go as long as he forces the issue, right?
Yeah.
I'm with you. Like, that schedule does make it work. Like, you can afford to do that. You can ride the hot hand. And if that's going to be Joey through that whole stretch, then it'll be Joey through that whole stretch. It's really just going to come down to him at this point.
Right. And the thing is, too, at the end of January, you've got the All-Star break coming up.
Yeah.
So if, I wouldn't want to do it any longer than, maybe January 30th, the end of January at San Jose. But then if that's all you go, then you have 10 days off before Philly, your next game too. And then it all the clock starts over again. So they could ride Joey Daccord for a surprisingly long time, which I think is probably good because it means you don't have to rush Grubauer back.
Yeah.
And you don't have to really work him in too strongly, or you don't have to necessarily rely on Chris Driedger for too many big games in the meantime. But this schedule is just setting up to be Joey's net for a while.
Yeah, and this all feels crazy too, considering Chris Driedger has played one game, and in that one game he had a .974 save percentage and only allowed.
Right, it's not a problem if you need to turn to him, apparently.
No, it's not. So it's one of those things. Like I am very much, especially given the nature of Grubauer's injury, playing that long term. Right, he came back, he got hurt again. Like it's one of those things that can really linger with a goaltender. I think you do have to be extra careful there. I just want to throw it out there. Like we keep acting like Driedger doesn't exist and he hasn't played well. It's a limited sample size, but he played very, very well in that game. So just want to throw that out there, that if Grubauer, if you can still be cautious with Grubauer, given that Chris Driedger is not the worst third option to turn to in the NHL. All right. From that now to kind of the rest of the roster, RJ, and how it's shaking up. Willie Nylander, I mean, he was somebody that we knew it was going to be tough. He was going to be kind of the jewel of this, free agent class upcoming this year. Taken off the board, Toronto re-signs him, 8-year deal, $11.5 million per. That's the cap hit for him. Lots of talk on the Discord, obviously, about this. Could the Kraken have afforded to pay somebody that kind of contract, all of that sort of thing, and whether or not it lines up with what the Kraken want to do. I know you talk about this a lot on the Armchair GMs, but just for the people who aren't necessarily patrons, I thought it would be good to talk with, just everybody and kind of get some of this stuff out there. You and I are both of the opinion that this is the offseason to try to make a splash if you're the Kraken. You're going to have cap space. You got contracts like Eberle's 5.5 coming off. You've got Alexander Wenberg's 4.5 coming off the books. You got Justin Schultz's $3 million coming off the books. You're going to need to extend guys like Tolvanen and Matty Beniers. Like that is going to need to happen. But at the same time, RJ, the Kraken, with the cap going up $4.5 million, they're going to have space. They're going to have some stuff to work with this offseason, and it feels like timing-wise, now is the time to do something.
Right, and I played with these numbers a little bit on the Armchair GM chat, as you mentioned, and we're going to do that again later this month, too, and kind of see some options the Kraken have. But it's been clear to me for a little while that the Kraken have one big addition they can make, and the more time that goes on, the more that we're seeing this roster and how it's built, I think we're starting to see the urgency that it really needs to be made right away. It needs to be made this off season. And you never want to get boxed into having to make a deal. You want to kind of let the players come to you, the situations come to you. But looking at this roster construction, especially with guys like Shane Wright and Riker Evans, I think we're seeing just about best case scenarios on them development wise. I mean, I'll defer to you on that kind of stuff because you're the best prospect guy. But given that Shane Wright looks so good in the AHL, given that Riker Evans looks like he's ready right now, you have a valuable window here while those guys are on entry-level contracts to be competitive and take advantage of what that gives you. You can have Shane Wright as a second-line center next season, a legit good second-line center playing on an entry-level contract, and that's going to free up some salary cap space elsewhere. Running the numbers, the Kraken, I think, are going to have about basically $11.5 million in cap space, basically one Nylander contract's worth that they can add this offseason without having to move anything else around, without having to get rid of anyone, without having to subtract aside from the guys that we already know are on expiring contracts. And that begs the question, okay, what do you do with that? And how urgent is it that you add it right away? And I know, Dylan, you probably agree here that something needs to be done pretty soon.
Yeah, I think now is the time because of, like you said, you don't want to waste all those ELC years, right? If Shane Wright's going to come in and be a good second line center for you, and he's going to cost you less than $1 million, or maybe with performance bonuses a little over $1 million against the cap, that is such an unbelievable fortunate thing to have, right? Like that's something that you really don't want to waste. Again, if you're getting that high level production, that power play quarterback from a Riker Evans at under 900,000 against the cap, like that is something you need to take advantage of if you are a team in today's NHL. Like there's just no way around that. You have to try to take advantage of getting contributions from guys on ELCs. It's just the way it is. I know people are worried about sacrificing depth. look, the Kraken almost have too much depth that it's become a problem. We talked about that earlier, right? You've got Jared McCann on a fourth line. You have no idea how to give minutes to the guy, right? Like, so I don't know that you totally have to worry about that. I think more so the worry has to be this Kraken team has had depth all year. They're 28th in the league in goal scoring, right? Depth is a good thing to have. It doesn't always equal, performance. Sometimes it is worth having a guy like a Willie Nylander who costs $11.5 million, but he's going to put up a point to 2 points every single night for your team. He's going to be a consistent driver of offense that you can count on games when other guys maybe just don't have it that night, right? There is something to be said for star players like that. You go back and you look at I went all the way back, RJ, to the lockout, the 05 lockout, looking at every Stanley Cup winning team, and I would argue only that Carolina team that won post-lockout didn't have a true star player on it, and that's only because that was really Eric Stahl's first year, and he put up 100 and something points in the regular season and was great in the playoffs. So you could argue that he was their star player, but every single roster has star players. They have guys making a lot of money up at the top end of the, of around 10% of the cap, all that kind of stuff. And so, St. Louis is the only other one that you can kind of argue didn't really have the star. They just had an insanely hot goaltender. And
right. Whatever. They didn't look, they were last place in January. That's kind of the anomaly. That's the outlier there.
Yeah, exactly. All right. So I'll give you one, maybe two of the last, 15 or 20 cup champs. It's ridiculous. So you do need star players in this league. You can't just have depth. You need to have depth below those star players, but you need the star players. And as it looks like Matty Beniers is kind of what we always thought he was going to be, which is more of a two-way guy rather than just a pure driver of offense, given that Shane Wright, who can be more of a pure driver of offense, is going to be young. He's going to be playing a first full season in the NHL. I think you need to go out there and find somebody who can join Jared McCann as a guy who can really produce. And McCann can produce goals. We've seen, the point production not always be there. I think you need somebody who can also help the guys around them the way, say, a Willie Nylander can with the point production, a little bit beyond what Jared McCann can just do on his own. So I just think it's one of those things that every team that wins has one of those guys. You've got the cap space for it. You've got the good fortune of having good players on ELCs. The time is now. You got to strike while that iron's hot, because you have no idea how long you're going to have to wait for that next opportunity. And then, RJ, on the flip side, talk about the young guys that are cheap. You look at the rest of the roster. I'm looking at Jamie Alexiak at 31, Adam Larson at 31, Brian Dumoulin at 32, Yanni Gourde at 32, Brandon Tanev at 32. Those guys aren't getting very, any younger, right? If you want to try to win with them as your depth, as affordable depth, especially on the blue line there, you got to kind of get going on that too, right? You don't want them to start stretching it even further and then their contracts are up and you've got to try to find ways of replacing those guys. And I'm telling you right now, especially on the blue line, you're not going to find replacements for a guy like Adam Larson or a Jamie Alexiak for that price, right, out on the open market, and trying to do it internally is going to be tough too. So it's one of those things where the Kraken have a really good setup right now. I just think they need an aggressive offseason, RJ, to kind of make it happen.
Yeah, especially you look at the blue line, and they were able to do. Ron Francis did something great in the expansion draft, with Adam Larson at $4 million, Jamie Alexiak at 4.6, getting those bargains of contracts. And I know the talking points around the expansion draft and the first season, especially when it started to not go very well, was, well, this is a young team. We've kind of built a young team. It's got to develop. I don't think that was entirely accurate. You look at a lot of the guys they brought in, and they were kind of in their prime, or maybe even a little bit past statistically what a player's prime should be. And we're starting to see that with, Larson, Alexiak, all the guys you mentioned, that are over 30. And I think it really highlights that the Kraken kind of have two separate cores of players. Or two separate windows, I guess you could say. The window with the guys from the expansion draft that we all know and love, whether it's the Alexiak, Larson, Eberle, Gourde, those guys. And then you have the window with the draft picks, guys the Kraken have drafted and developed themselves. Those guys aren't here yet. Only a couple of them, Matty Beniers, Shane Wright, the very, very high end. But you have the first window where you have these supporting pieces, like, again, Brandon Tanev, another good example of those guys, that you can try and win with right now. And then you have the second window with guys coming in for depth, like eventually, a Yanni Newman or, Carson Reichoff, all these guys that they drafted over the last couple of years, and they're still a few years away. I mean, Dylan, on your prospect chats, you kind of given a timeline in your rankings for each of these guys when we expect to see them in the NHL. And the real answer is not yet. Only a few of these guys can supplement things right now. And so you're in a position now where going into next offseason, you can bring in a player that works for the first window and can also spread a little bit into the second window, that can kind of bridge that gap, where you're going to have guys that come in that can replace those depth players and do it cheaply while this contract runs, a very expensive contract. Again, I think Nylander would have been like the perfect option for this, 8 times 11.5 at his age, it just works perfectly. But if you can get somebody that fits in that window, it can kind of help you really for both windows that you have.
Yeah, exactly. And so it's one of those things, we're just going to have to wait and see. But I would also say, look, Ron Francis has shown he can go out and find depth forwards, right? Like you look at the moves to bring in a Tolvanen off waivers, to make a move for Tomas Tatar, right? Or to go out there and take advantage of the situation around Kailer Yamamoto, right? Bring those guys in, bring in a Devon Shore, right? Bring in a Belmar. Like, Ron Francis has shown really through both last offseason and then the offseason prior, he can do that, right? It's a lot easier to fill in those gaps offensively at forward. You can find guys on league minimum deals or at $1 million. You go back to even before that, right? With some of the pseudo expansion guys, Daniel Sprong, you bring him in, right, as a throw in a trade. You got guys like Morgan Geekie, right? Ryan Donato, right? Taking a flyer on him, somebody who seemed to be on his way out of the NHL. And so you can find depth guys like that to fill out your bottom six at very reasonable rates, right? Talking max of $1.5 million per, right? And so I think that's one of those things where, yes, the depth won't be the same players, just like this year isn't the same players as last year when it comes to that depth at forward. But he's shown us that that's not something you totally have to worry about. You can always find the depth if you understand how your team plays, if you have a strong front office around you of, pro level scouts, of analytics people, of all of that kind of stuff. You can find those diamonds in the rough because there's a lot of them, and you can make things work. And then you can also slowly start supplementing with your young players on ELCs, whether it's a Furcus, a Newman, a Reichoff, a Chalet, whatever it is, over the next couple of years. You'll be able to do that as well. The blue line's a lot tougher, and that's where I was spending most of my focus, because you can't do that on a blue line. You certainly can't do that for 3 guys on a blue line, right? And so that's one where I think the blue line kind of dictates that if you want to try to win anything in the short term, you've got to go for it now. I mean, RJ, it's almost one of those where if the Kraken were in a better spot standings-wise, I'd be saying they need to be aggressive at the trade deadline.
Yeah, and I think they're within that first window where you kind of have to go for it, given where the blue line's at. Again, Alexiak, Larson, Schwartz, those replacements. You look at the D prospect pool, and I mean, you would know this better than I would. Yes, you have Riker Evans, who's going to step in and be a regular. We know that right now, but who else is there? That's going to come in and take like a top 4 spot. There is nobody.
There's nobody. That's the absolute...
I think Ottavainen projects as like a good, third pairing defenseman. He could be solid, but not yet. I mean, who else do they have?
Yeah, I mean, Ty Nelson's like their next top blue line prospect, but again, he like maxes out at top 4, right? He has his limitations. Mm-hmm. I love him. He's great. He can, run a second unit power play for your team, all that kind of stuff, but he's not going to be somebody that you can throw out there first unit penalty kill. Right? Like a Lars or an Alexiak. He's not going to be that guy. He's not going to be a guy who can, if you need him to chew up 25 minutes a night. Like, he's just not, that's not him. And this has been a thing we've talked about on the Prospect Live chats a lot. Kraken don't have a lot of depth defensively in their prospect pool. Like, it's kind of Riker Evans and that's it. It's several tiers then you got to go before you hit more guys. And so that's something that they're going to have to address long term as well. But yeah, those depth signings that turn out to be good players on defense are few and far between for teams. So you got to take advantage of it while you have it. And the Kraken are just in this amazingly fortunate position where they have 7 defensemen equaling about $25.5 million in cap space, and they're all playable.
Yeah, it's incredible. I mean, this is one of the best looking blue lines just from a, bang for your buck standpoint in the NHL. And you got to take advantage of that while you have it because it's not going
Yep.
to last forever.
And
And,
he,
that's
yeah,
really what we're saying
yeah,
is you got 2 years left on this max. And basically once the Larson contract runs out, it's going to look very different.
exactly. So it's one of those things that I think the Kraken got to start getting aggressive again. I just think if they hadn't dug such a big hole, RJ, I think you could
I
argue
know.
this trade deadline, but I just don't think they're there.
Right. Because, I mean, you could look for the aggressive move to make, I guess, would look for one of these other guys whose contract is expiring, whether it's like a
Yeah.
Lindholm or a Reinhardt or someone like that, and you could get him at the deadline, get him for another playoff run as well, and then try and convince him to stay. If you could do that, or maybe have some conditional picks.
Hmm.
I don't think they're in a good enough position in the standings, like you said, to really go and do that and give up the assets to. But still, they're going to be in a great position in the offseason, and Ron Francis is going to get to go big game hunting for probably the first time in his career as a
Yeah.
GM.
Yeah.
He's not used to doing this, and so I'm interested to see how he adjusts to do something that's really, I think, not in his nature.
Yeah, well, we saw him get aggressive not this past offseason, but the offseason prior, right? And it was he went out and he did sign some bigger free agents, right? He brought in a Justin Schultz, who was a bigger name, not necessarily a bigger contract, signs Andre Burakovsky to his contract, goes out, makes the trade for Oliver Bjorkstrand, right? And look at the leap that team was able to take from year one to year two. So again, it's one of those things that he's shown that he can do it when given the opportunity. This is going to be, though, the most kind of pivotal off season, and it's a lot's going to come riding on it, because it's also one of those things of, if you get it wrong or if you're not able to make it happen, that window closes fast. It can close really
Yeah,
fast.
it sneaks up on you, and teams have learned this, over their time, where they, think, okay, well, we can make a move next year, and then all of a sudden you just don't seem like the same team because you don't have those reinforcements. We saw throughout the Kraken's downstretch this season where they were digging themselves a hole, how this foundation where you don't have a star to pull you out of a rut like that
Mm-hmm.
kind of be built on shaky ground, and you never know when that might happen again if you don't have a star player playing for you. So that's something they have to consider. Question for you, Dylan, though. I think William Nylander, we agreed, was basically could have been the perfect person to fill this
Yeah.
hole. Like
Yeah.
if the Kraken had signed him to this contract that the Leafs had just signed him to, I mean, if it's 7 years, not 8, because the Kraken couldn't have done that, 8,
Yeah.
but still, you have 7 times 11 and a half. We would have been thrilled with that in the offseason.
Yep.
How concerned should we be about that no longer being on the table? Because I don't know that you're going to find a better option out there. Doesn't mean you can't find a good option, but like, I know for a while we wanted Sebastian Aho before he signed his extension.
Yeah.
And, one by one, these players kind of fall away. And of course, on the Armchair GM chat, we can kind of get deeper into, okay, who are the options that they have? Who could we be looking at? What those contracts look like? But how big a deal is Nylander signing an extension, realizing that he's not an option at all for Seattle?
I mean, it's a big deal, but it's also one of those, like, I don't know realistically also how likely Seattle was to get him, right? Because everybody was going to be offering him roughly the same money. You were going to have to really pitch him on the team, the setup, all of that kind of stuff. So, it wasn't like, if the Leafs hadn't re-signed him, it was a slam dunk he was coming to Seattle. It wasn't that situation at all. I will say that, yes, it's one of those things of, it shows you how, when you have those guys, how infrequently they are made available, right? They are just not, they don't hit free agency very often. They are definitely not up for trade very often, right? And so it's one of those things of, when the opportunity is there to bring somebody in, you have to be aggressive and you have to be decisive with it. And, Kraken weren't totally in the place to be aggressive for a Jack Eichel. They weren't, apparently in the spot to be aggressive for a Jacob Chikrin, right? But
well, they were.
They were, but it's Arizona wanted a very high pick. Apparently, they would rather that rather than multiple assets for whatever insane reason. So the Kraken were kind of out there. But it's one of those things of, the next time one of those opportunities comes along, you have to be willing to give up the significant assets it's going to take to make it happen, because otherwise you could wait offseason after offseason after offseason for one of those guys to hit the market, and then you've got to compete with probably 16 or 17 other teams to convince them to come to you, and it's just one of those things of, you basically got as good odds to go out and play the lottery. And it's just one of those things. So yeah, it's one of those. Kraken fans got to be ready for when something like that happens, to either give out the big contract or give up the picks and prospects to make it happen, because that's the only way to get it done.
Yeah, or both. I mean, it's probably going to be both with
both.
whoever you're bringing in. And that's my big takeaway, is that I think it just makes that much more likely that you're going to have to turn to the trade market, that it's not going to be. I know there's still a couple of good UFAs left, but I just think the more likely outcome is the trade market. You see players. I mean, we were just talking about Eichel and Chychrun. Those are both guys who were traded. I think that's probably what you're going to see more likely. And you never know what RFA a team might want to move on from. There are probably guys that we're not even thinking about right now that might be available this offseason. You never know, but I want Francis to swing for the fences. Go big game hunting and get the biggest fish you can.
Exactly. I think we're both on board with that. And again, everybody, you can join RJ on the 23rd of this month if you're a member of our Patreon, and you can, hear about some of those options, who they might be, the names, what those contracts might look like, what the assets to make a trade might have to be that the Kraken would be giving up. So you can join him on the 23rd. Join us both on the 18th to watch that Edmonton game live. We can all be there to celebrate beating the Oilers together, or be there to help each other out if that game doesn't go as well. And then on the 29th, I'll be talking about those prospects as well and where they're all at. Maybe, if you want, I can talk about what value they would have on a trade market too to other teams. I'm totally willing to talk about that kind of stuff over on Patreon. Another huge shout out to Queen Beer Hall for sponsoring the podcast. As always, check out both of their awesome locations, especially, with big games coming up for the Seattle area sports. Definitely check them out. And until next time, we'll see you.
Hey everyone, before we go, we just wanted to give a quick shout out to all of our awesome patrons over at patreon.com/Emerald City Hockey, especially our Terror of the Deep patrons: Absurdly Sane, Alex, Alvi, Andrew, Anonymous, Anthony, Beef, Ben, Brad, Brian, Burnt Creme, Kat, Kaylin, Shazzle Dazzle, Chip, Chris, Christian, Cody, Connor, Coop, Corey, DJ Singletone, Duthin, Evie99, Eli, Elizabeth, Empty Net Hockey, Eric, Ethan, Evan, Fusion Mix, Gaby, Gary, Gregory, Harry Legionary, Helena, Habak, Jay, Jane, Jessica, Joni, Joseph, Josh, Joshua, Julia, Justin, Katie, Kepler, Kitty B. Kraken,
Elle Bell, Leanne, Levin, Light, Lonnie, Maeve, Mark, Max, Maya, Michelle, Nick, Night Drop, Noah, Nunya, Paige, Paul, Rachel, Rayanne, Randall, Rebecca, Ryan, Sarah, Scott, Sia Kraken, Sean, Sergey, Sergeant Pickles, Shannon, Shoeshine, Skeletal Tendency, Steve, Steven, Striatic, Tasty Kobold, Team 114 Chris, Ty, Wendy, Where the Slovakians At, Zane, and Zoe. Thank you so much for making all this possible. We really appreciate your support.